Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the February installment of the values webinar. And want to thank you all for joining us. And special hello to those of you who were at the Train the Trainers event this past weekend. It was a great workshop. Lots of really smart people all in the same room learning together, and there will be more opportunities in the future. Specifically, this weekend on Sunday from 10 to 2 is the online version. So if you are still interested in the online version, go to my website, frame4future.com, frame the number 4future.com, and you can register there. And obviously there'll be opportunities in the future as well. And this evening, what I'm going to do is I want to go over some things not only about messaging, but about what we should be focusing on in terms of messaging, so that we can have a productive discussion with people that we need to be connecting with. And that's both Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Progressives, Conservatives, everybody. Because the bottom line is we're all in this together, and we need to start getting people to actually start caring about each other again. So a couple housekeeping points here. There's been a lot of discussion about messaging. It's been all over the place in terms of the news and strategy and what we do moving forward. And it seems like all this talk about messaging is kind of creating this confusion over what messaging actually is. And there seems to be a lot of discussion about messaging just in terms of language, but not in terms of ideas and not in terms of action. So in talking to some people, including some that were at the workshop this past weekend, it seems like we should stop talking about messaging and start talking more about communicating values, communicating ideas. And I think that's a good approach for the future. So without any further ado, feel free to comment in the live chat box. I'll be able to see that come up instantaneously. And it's a good way for us to communicate, ask questions, things like that. And this webinar I would like to think of as a call for action. As the title slide shows, there is a big values difference between the authoritarians currently in power and most people that you meet on the street, or people in your family, people, your friends, neighbors. And the difference is caring for others versus ego and self-interest. And what we're seeing play out is this kind of egocentric, authoritarian, self-interest frame on steroids, both in thought and words and action. And as George Lakoff has pointed out repeatedly, that can actually change behavior. And I would recommend watching, last week Dr. Lakoff was on the Tavis Smiley show. So if you go to the PBS website and look for the Tavis Smiley show link, there is a podcast and a video of, it's about a 25-minute interview. And what's really interesting is that George really blows Tavis Smiley's mind in terms of talking about this whole idea about Trump changing people's brains and the importance of caring for each other, to our democracy, to freedom, to the future, and to government. So it's really interesting to watch the interview between somebody in Tavis Smiley who hears a lot of the establishment Democratic chatter in the Beltway and beyond, and then Lakoff, kind of explaining how framing works and how important it is. So to that end, one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight is this idea of caring and why it's so important for what we're trying to do, and especially in terms of government. Why is caring for others so important? And obviously the first thing that caring for others evokes is this idea of empathy. And we've talked a lot in the past about the core beliefs for progressive views, and every time I go through these I point out that they are nonpartisan. I believe that if you talk to somebody like that and you evoke these progressive views, these progressive moral views, that freedom comes with responsibility, democracy works when caring citizens act with empathy, private prosperity, private enterprise depends on the public, and the fact that our government and elected officials have a responsibility to protect and empower people, you would get a large number of people agreeing with those statements. And the importance of those ideas are that they will strengthen empathy. And most importantly, they will impede activation of these authoritarian ideas that are so dominant. And that is really important in trying to start a movement, reinforce a movement, give a movement some kind of a message for people to rally around. And that is to impede authoritarian ideas and strengthen empathy. So one of the things that we need to really start communicating very widely and loudly is this idea that by their very nature, authoritarians don't care about other people. Their only motivation is for dominance and self-interest. And when you look at Trump, and the reason for his success is that he is constantly trying to dominate. His body language, even his handshake, his language, the way he speaks is all about dominance and then of course self-interest. And I brought up some examples from the media recently that I thought were really, really relevant. And all these are from the last couple of weeks. So the first one is Trump commenting, and I would encourage you to look at some of his tweets and consider them in terms of dominance and ego, and you'll see how that plays out. And as Lakoff has pointed out, that has the power to change people's brains. So Trump repeatedly says at campaign appearances, and he has said it since then, that Bergdahl is a traitor who should be harshly punished, and that he repeatedly used phrases such as "no good traitor" to refer to a soldier who was held captive by the Taliban and its allies for 5 years. So that completely has to do with authoritarian hierarchy, and also this idea of dominance. That Trump's ideas, that his moral view of right and wrong should be respected and dominant. The second one is about the handshake style. And if you go to The Guardian, they actually have this great video analysis of Trump's, as they call it, unusual handshake style. And they actually go through some frame-by-frame analysis of his handshake style. And experts have evaluated it and said that the entire purpose of this kind of jerky movement of putting his hand above another person's hand and then kind of jerking it towards him, tugging, and holding on to it until he decides to let go is a completely unconscious way of dominating people. So even body language, handshake style is important, and that he's trying to dominate people. And they actually pointed out that Justin Trudeau managed to counter his handshake style by, when Trump reached out to shake Trudeau's hand, Trudeau reached out and grabbed Trump's shoulder and steadied the handshake process against Trump's shoulder, and that he initiated the release, not Trump. So that was an interesting, whether there was something conscious that he did and studied it, who knows, but so more dominance. So the next quote is about the Martin Luther King Day quote-unquote listening session that Trump had with the conservative African-American pastor Darrell Scott. And Trump is talking about saying how he met Pastor Darrell Scott when he was defending me, as in Trump, on television. And this is interesting. The people that were on the other side of the argument, so in Trump's worldview, they would be the undisciplined liberals who are just trying to give people a free pass, didn't have a chance, referring to the pastor's appearances on various news shows to back Trump during the election. So here's Trump imposing his worldview, saying that this pastor's a good guy because he defended me and my actions and my point of view, and that because of that, the people on the other side didn't have a chance, right? They were weak, they were going to fail, they were going to lose. So there again, we see the authoritarian dominance coming into play. So there's a few other ones that are more recent, and these are even more blatant in terms of dominance and authoritarianism than the others. So the first one is this idea that the executive order banning travelers who have gone through the extensive background checks, the extensive clearance as immigrants and refugees, going through multiple agencies over 2 years at least. After that was banned, after that ban was stayed by the court, Trump comes out and says that this travel ban was done for the security of our nation. So there he's, bringing in the conservative frame of security for our nation, and should be respected, as in his authority should be respected. And this next one I really like, because he's talking about the new sanctions that he imposed on Iran. And he talks about how Iran doesn't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them. Not me! Exclamation mark in a tweet. Right? So here he's a more strict authoritarian than President Obama. President Obama was kind to them, as in too lenient, and Trump saying, not me. The days of turning a blind eye to Iran's hostile and belligerent actions toward the United States and the world community are over, right? Because he says so. Notice how he's not talking about any kind of cooperation with the United Nations. He's not talking about any kind of diplomatic strategy or negotiations. He's saying, this is my word, and they're turning a blind eye is over because I said so, not me! Exclamation mark. So very important language. The language here is everything, because it reinforces his actions. So finally, this is an interesting one, because this is during the National Prayer Breakfast. So primarily this is going to be a Christian audience. With Trump, it's going to be a primarily conservative Christian audience. And this came after his kind of diplomatic, yes, we do. We need we need to do a training on how to counter tweets. And unfortunately, as we talked about in the workshop, is that the reason Trump's tweets are so effective is because those deep frames that he references are well established and well understood. It would be hard for us to say, okay, let's do 144 characters in the progressive frame to counter what Trump says, because for the vast majority of people, those deep frames, they haven't even been established yet. So, but yeah, that would be something that would definitely be effective in terms of at least trying to get the word out in a different frame. And we'll look at some of that coming up here. So Trump tells his National Prayer Breakfast audience, don't worry about my, this is great, tough phone calls. Because he got tough with Malcolm Turnbull, who's the actually conservative Prime Minister of Australia, saying, your deal to send us immigrants that you have turned away is a bad deal. But what Trump said is they're tough. We have to be tough because, and this is a reference to previous administrations, we're taken advantage of by every nation in the world, virtually, he said. Right, so he's saying, I'm going to be tough. Right? They're tough. I'm tougher. We're not going to be taken advantage anymore because I said so. So the whole thing is this, really overtly egotistical, authoritarian, and people buying into it, believing that he's going to lead them out of the wilderness. And there is a lot of foundation for that in human culture. People looking for the authoritarian figure to lead them down the road. Yeah, right, and don't worry about it. Don't worry. He says that all the time. Yeah, don't worry about it. I got this. It's almost a way of saying, nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. You can depend on me, the authoritarian, to take care of it. Go ahead and live your lives, and we're not going to have to worry about it. So this is really a dominant frame, and of course for people to hear it in the news all the time, over and over, and unfortunately even from some of our democratic and progressive politicians, they reinforce this stuff all the time, because when you attack it and you try to make fun of it, you're still evoking those ideas. So to this point of coming up with tweets that counter it, here's a suggestion. The idea of caring for others will impede authoritarianism. So quick water drink here for me. So some of you have heard this story before, and it's actually worth repeating, is that George Lakoff tells the story about his graduate classes and people coming to him before the holidays and saying, I can't talk to my grandpa or my uncle or my aunt or my grandma or my mom and dad. I can't talk to them during the holidays because we talk about politics and then everybody just gets in a fight. And, George says, look, when you go home, don't get in a fight with them. They love you. They have a different moral system than you do. So instead, go to your conservative, whoever it is, family member, and say, let's talk about something that you've done to help people over the past couple months. Something that made you feel good, something that you're proud of, that you've done for something. And look, cutting a check or, making a donation, a cash donation to a charity or something doesn't count. Something you actually go and physically do to help someone, right? Well, the brilliance of that question is that it gets to this next slide, which is that if we evoke the idea of caring for other people, it will impede authoritarianism. And why is that? Because when you activate empathy, you suppress self-interest. Think about it. If you were thinking about caring for other people, if you're thinking about your neighbor just had an accident and is laid up or something, and you're thinking about going over there and talking to them and helping them, maybe connecting with them through some, maybe you take them some soup or and you sit and chat or something, right? If you're thinking about that, you can't think about your own self-interest. And you certainly can't think in terms of putting yourself above that person, because you're putting yourself on an equal ground with them to connect, right? So if you are connecting with that person through empathy, or you're thinking about caring for other people, even if you are Scott Walker, let's say he's somehow capable of caring for other people. If you're thinking about caring for other people, you can't be selfish. You can't think in your self-interest. Your brain doesn't let you. Both those frames can't be active at the same time. It's called mutual inhibition. So the call to action tonight is, and maybe this goes to the counter tweets, this whole idea of counter tweets and counter messages. We need to counter with stories and metaphors that communicate our ideals of how caring for others is not only a moral responsibility, but it's just a good thing to do. It makes you feel good. It helps you connect with people, and that is how we solve our mutual problems. And this gets us into the moral realm, right? And I was talking to somebody during our lunch break on Saturday, and we were actually talking about the kind of religious aspect of this. And there's this idea that the progressive view of religion, which, so for Christianity, would be kind of the New Testament idea, is just completely lost. And how great would it be to start making that dominant again? The idea that we're our brothers and sisters' keeper, or we all learn the golden rule, the idea of do unto others. That's a very, very basic moral system for people. And then the idea of the Good Samaritan. And I've told the story before, and you can listen to FDR's first speech about the New Deal, where he talks about your government is on the same side of the street as the Good Samaritan, right? The idea, the metaphor that your government is on the side of the street, the morally correct side of the street, with the Good Samaritan helping people. And those who are against these ideas just pass by on the other side of the street and turn a blind eye. That was brilliant by FDR, because it makes it a moral imperative. And what I would challenge all of you to do, and there's a good number of people on the webinar tonight, is to take these ideas and start using them in a positive way, so that when you see something about Trump saying how he's going to be in control of things and you do it his way and everything will be wine and roses, when he's really talking about dominating and self-interest of a few people, is to turn that frame around and start talking about that issue in terms of caring for other people. So for example, the immigration thing, there are thousands of people who are losing freedom, and it's clearly showing that he doesn't care about people, because the right thing to do would be to welcome people into our communities, show them that we care about them, and that through connecting with them, we'll find out that they care for us too. This country is full of people that did not originate here. And yet, we have all these wonderful cultural examples from food and art and science and healthcare of things that, people not from here do to help us, so shouldn't we be there to help them and care for them? So you get the idea. And really what this comes down to is that we need to be able to build a cognitive strategy. And I believe that between what Mike McCabe is doing with Blue Jean Nation and all the people coming together for things like the women's marches and all these grassroots groups popping up all over the place, is we're starting to see kind of organizations that could be the foundation of a cognitive strategy. And all it's going to take is for all of those people in all of those different groups to coalesce around a kind of message that talks about the politics of caring, that brings people together around the idea of caring for other people, not separating them by issue or demographic. And to the point that it's okay to advocate for an issue. It's okay to, advocate for clean water, clean air, public schools, things like that. But we get to the core values, the why those issues are important, and our position is it's because caring for people is important. It's a moral responsibility, and our nation, our democracy depends on all of us, caring for each other. And organizations that evoke and act on that kind of a message can provide a positive vision about what the future looks like when we all care for each other. See, and that's more powerful than this idea of a dominant authoritarian figure who doesn't care about other people, that only cares about himself and a few others. That's more powerful in bringing people together. So it's this idea of a cognitive strategy that's built on a caring for other people message, organizations that work together to evoke those ideas, and then you have an emergence of leaders who are not picked by a party because they can raise money. They're not picked by a small group of people because they think this person can not only raise money but talk about business the right way or something like that. They will authentically emerge because they excel at living and acting on the values of caring for others, right? So that's how this kind of three-legged stool can function. And again, my challenge for everybody here, and when I email out the link, I'll repeat it to folks who weren't on it, so as they watch the webinar they can be thinking about it, is this, right? So this is a quote from Lakoff towards the end of the show, and I thought it was brilliant because this gets to the idea of building that cognitive strategy and all of us helping to make that happen. And it starts out very simple, something that you all understand. You're on this webinar because you understand this, is that language matters. And the most important part about language and this idea of framing and values is that actions matter. So the language can lead to action, and that certain kinds of actions matter. And he talks about the Women's March. Why was the Women's March so important? And why was it what it was? And why did it have to be women? And Lakoff observes it's because it was about caring. And for those of you who've been paying attention, women are cognitively more capable of empathy than men. And there's been some criticism, which Lakoff points out, that each of these women had a different issue, different view, etc. And he said no, they had one issue. Everybody showed up, men and women, for the Women's March because they care. And this is the brilliant statement. I think this needs to be at the core of what we do. The point of a progressive democratic government, and Democrat, capital D, as in the party, it's not just about elections, right? So it's not just about voter ID. It's not just about redistricting. It's not just about those things, right? It's about citizens caring for other citizens and working through that government towards that care, right? And without care, there's no democracy. And that's really true. And those are the ideas through caring that we need to start evoking. So my challenge to all of you is that we need all these voices. So we talked about it in the Train the Trainers, that this focus on caring and what that means to democracy and freedom is key. And I will be continuing to present ideas in the right. Exactly. That is a clear statement of why. Right? Why does public education, the progressive view of public education, matter? Why does protecting land and water matter? Why does healthcare for all matter? It's because it's about caring for others. And most people should understand that at one point or another, there were people that cared about you. And it's your moral responsibility to, use the, pay it forward. Brother's keeper, sister's keeper, whatever. We have lots of things to build on. So through, additional trainings, through your organizations, and all of you have organizations you work with, we can start pushing those ideas of caring for others and that our democracy and our freedom depends on it. Because honestly, if your neighbor doesn't care for you and doesn't give a rat's what about you, then it makes democracy very difficult. It makes freedom very difficult. And those are things that people can start to recognize. So there's been, some chat here. I know this webinar was a bit more lecture-ish than you're used to, but I think coming off of the, fantastic idea. Coming off the, the dozen people that are on this webinar, you're all connected with organizations, and I think coming off the training that was done this past weekend, and the one that will be this Sunday online, plus the organizations that everybody's involved with, I think there are some real opportunities here to start finally building this cognitive strategy that engages a lot of organizations, and that we could potentially see some new leaders emerge from. And who knows? Who knows who those people are and what will come of that. So with that, as I said, I know this was more of a lecture type of thing than we're used to seeing, but these are really critical ideas. And we're at a point now where these ideas are badly needed, because honestly, without them, you can kind of see the response from the usual Democratic parties, the usual kind of progressive talking heads, is just this idea of resist, resist, resist. And our history, especially in Wisconsin, has taught us that resistance is only as good as the message of the movement. And as with the recall, there wasn't a very coalesced movement. There wasn't a very strong message that changed the frame from what Walker and his allies were talking about. So even to this day, Act 10 is still considered to be a moral, moral action, and it has not been successfully reframed by progressives. So with that, I don't see any other questions being posed. I'm going to say good night and thank you very, very much. This will be up on the web tomorrow, so look for it. I'll shoot it an email. Here's a good question. That's a great question, and I'm going to answer that in two ways. There's people that ran for office in some of the rural areas as Democrats who were competitive. They had good messages, they had really good grassroots campaigns, and they actually did pretty well. Christine Welcher comes to mind, Jeff Wright comes to mind, Mandy Wright up in the Wausau area, and there's some others. And they didn't win, but they did pretty darn well. In fact, Christine Welcher, running against Tyler August, whose leadership in the Republican Party, she got more votes in her district than either Russ Feingold or Hillary Clinton did. So she outperformed the two top of the ticket people in her district. And one of the problems that all these people expressed when you talk to them about their experiences, that there were people that just simply wouldn't vote for them because they were Democrats in these rural areas. So, to that point, it's difficult because many times the Democrat is just the door slammed shut in terms of some rural people that maybe were even Democrats 20 or 30 years ago, or maybe even their parents were Democrats. So that's exactly, it is going to be a rebranding of the Democratic Party, the Democratic brand, in terms of caring for people in communities, in terms of what democracy means, what freedom is, and that it's the party of caring for people and caring for democracy. And then, of course, right, the hard part is acting on that. Because if you have, for example, the Democratic strongholds of Madison and Milwaukee, and the party is viewed as being seen as just serving constituencies in those areas, then of course it fuels that politics of resentment that Kathy Kramer's identified in the rural areas. Well, why do they only care about people in Milwaukee and Madison? Why don't they care about me? So it's action, and yeah, exactly. It has to be authentic, and it has to be action. And to the point Don made too, I think you can counter some of that by engaging with people in terms of caring and values right away, instead of going to a door or holding a listening session or an event or something and saying, "Hi, I'm running as a Democrat and here are my issues," and then the laundry list. Instead, going and saying to people, I want to listen to what you care about in the community, and then listen first, and then be able to authentically talk on that in terms of the values of caring for others, and say, look, I want to represent our values, and I believe our values mean that we care for each other, and let's work together, to make that happen. And there are definitely ways to do that, and yet too many people won't run, and maybe I think it's because people, first of all, they're afraid to stick their neck out when they don't think that there's any support there. So that's number one. Secondly, I think if there is a strong movement that has a strong message that resonates with people's values, then I think they would be more willing to run, instead of saying, wow, I got to run the gauntlet with all these issues. I have to raise all this money. and I still might not get any support, and I might get even doors slammed in my face because I'm a capital D Democrat. As I'm talking about small d democracy and community and things like that. So yeah, it's not easy, but I think with, again, the right message at the foundation of all these things gives us a much better chance of getting some of those people to run, and maybe getting them excited to run if it's something they believe in. And obviously, if it's something that they believe in, then it's more authentic, and etc. And to the point of the people who are training to help others in this, and to be good at evoking values and communicating values, I think that could be a tremendous boost to some of these communities and local organizations, to start bringing these ideas collectively. And I'm working on something with Mike McCabe to make that happen. How Dems came back in the late 50s. That's a good question. Mike McCabe talks about, even in Clark County, where he's from, in the 50s and 60s and even in the 70s, they had Democratic state reps. And they had a very progressive Democrat from Clark County back in the 60s and 70s who was for gay marriage back then. And this was somebody that got elected continuously in Clark County. So, the model is there in terms of it being possible. I think it just needs to become embraced again. The politics of caring have to become embraced, and people have to see it as being necessary. Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, Gaylord Nelson, and Gaylord Nelson had a very progressive message in terms of why is clean water and clean land so important. It was a populist message because this is about us, this is about our state, our future, and it resonated with so many people. So maybe it's time to start looking at some of those messages again that those people were communicating that won in rural areas. And I would bet that you're finding something about community, people working together, things we do together because we care for each other. And good discussion. So, okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Feel free to keep the ideas rolling and by email and such. And we will be seeing you next month, and seeing you, possibly some of you, Sunday. If you still want to register, go to my website, and the materials will be going out tomorrow afternoon to everybody. If you register late, I'll get them to you on Friday or Saturday. And we will see you all on the streets. Thanks. Have a great night.